Today, I'm putting together a t-shirt using my CP3000 cover hem from Janome and my Elna 745 5-thread serger. Stick around and see how you can fix skip stitches and how to remove a cover hem stitch. I will be working today on both my Serger and my Cover Pro cover hem stitch machine. So I'll be doing both machines today, and I'll show you what to do as far as hemming goes, flat and in the round. All right, and I've got my serger set up already with white thread, and I've saved a couple little scraps just to check and make sure that my seam allowance and everything is going fine. So I'm just going to run this through real quick just to make sure everything is working the way I want it to. Always good to test before you get to your actual project. Okay, looks to me like I have to do a little bit with the differential feed. It's waving a little bit. So my differential feed right now is set to 1. I'm going to increase that to like 1 1/4 because it's not a lot. And let's try that again and see what we get. Now this again is going across the grain on the knit where I don't want it to stretch out. And that worked nice and flat. So the first seam I'm going to do is going to be my shoulder seams. Now it's a cross grain cut on my shoulder seam, so that was why I want to make sure my differential feed was correct, because now I would end up with a nice flat seam here as opposed to one that would be wavy. If yours is wavy, do some more testing and play with your differential feed. To attach my sleeve, I'm going to find the center top to my sleeve, and I'm going to match that to the shoulder seam. Okay, now I have a little bit of extra there, which is not a problem. We're just going to trim that off. And I will pin this just so you can see how you should pin if you're going to pin at a serger. And to do that, I'm going to pin well away from my edge, because that's where I'm going to be stitching and I don't want that to go. But I'm also going to remove that before I get there, because I don't want to take the chance of trying to stitch through that pin. And we'll come down here and match the edges here. Now there will be some easing involved. That's okay, it's supposed to. There we go. And again, I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam, so I'm not trimming anything off. And like I said, if you want to pin, that's fine. Just make sure you remove the pin before you get to it and pin well away from where you're going to be stitching. There we go. Now here I'm coming up to my pin. And this is what I was talking about. If I leave this here, I'm probably going to stitch right through it. So I'm going to totally remove the pin before I ever get close to it. Okay, and I'm down here where my pin is again, so I'm going to remove my pin. And sew right off the edge. So now I have my sleeve attached. So there is my shoulder. Okay, now to do the hem on my sleeves, and I could have done this before I put them in. I'm going to, because this rolls, it's a single knit and it tends to do that, not unusual. I'm going to use a little bit of my Magic quilting and crafting spray. You can use starch, anything like that will work. What I'm going to do is just spray some of this on here, and I'm going to press it. Just that little bit of starch keeps that from rolling up. Now I have a hem gauge like this that gives me my markings this way where I can fold up and press. If you don't, you can use any kind of standard hem gauge, but I'm going to fold up about 3/4 of an inch for my hem, because that's about what I left myself. So we're just going to put a fold in here, like so. Okay, now we're ready to take it to the machine. Now at my cover hem, okay, I've got it set up for a 3-thread, 2-needle cover hem. I'm doing the wide cover hem. I know it looks like I got black thread in here. I'm not using those 2 spools, but I am going to double check my hem and make sure that I have it laid out the way I want it to. Just like on my serger, scrap piece of fabric, and I'm just going to run this through and make sure it's stitching on this fabric the same as it did on the previous project I did. And oh, that turned out real pretty. Don't need all that extra fabric. Okay, and I'll just use this as my runoff fabric. Okay, so going back to my sleeve, and I've already pressed the hem, I'm going to work on the right side of my fabric. Well, how do I know that's going to cover and do the cover stitch where I want it? I'm going to make sure that I've lined up the edge of my fabric, and it looks like right at the edge of my foot. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I want that left needle to still penetrate all the layers of the fabric. There we go. I want this left needle to still penetrate the folded fabric here on the edge. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to go ahead and use the edge of the foot as my guide. Just like so. Take it nice and slow. So you can see where I'm getting the edge of my fabric right against the edge of my foot. Now if you have a seam guide or something like that, you could also use that. We're just going to run this real quick. Now I'm not locking the seam on this because I am going to be going over stitching with the serger. So I don't need to lock the seam or the stitch. Now I'm down to the end, and I don't want to sew directly off. I want to sew onto my little scrap. So we'll just sew directly onto that. There we go. And I'm going to clip the threads. There we are. Oops. See where I've stitched that right across my hem. Now I'm going to go back and trim this closer to the edge of the stitching. And there I have it. So I've trimmed it closer to the stitching here, and that makes it real nice. If I were to get it, I could probably run it closer to the cut edge that I had. However, if the needle goes off the edge of the fabric when it's stitching and doesn't go through, you end up with a tunnel effect on the right side, which you don't want. So I want to make sure I was stitching through both layers of that hem, and that's why I made sure I was stitching with right into the edge of the fabric. And I just used the edge of my foot as my guide. Let's do the second side. Now I've got the neckline pinned and laid out on a dressmaker's hem just because it's easier for you to see what I did. And I'm going to spray this a little bit with my crafting spray, my magic. You can use spray starch again, and I'm just going to lightly douse this, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press it. Now I'm not going to press the edge of those pins because they're plastic, but I am going to press this all around so I get a nice crisp edge. This is my neckline, and it is going to be stretched as I go around just a little bit so that it lays nice and flat. And I'm using the edge of my foot as my guide for my stitching. Remove my pins, and we're going to start. Now I could have done this flat the way we did the sleeves and just come back and do the seam allowance, but I didn't want that at my neck. I wanted that nice clean edge at the seam line. Now I'm coming back up to where I started, and I'm going to do what they call an overstitch. And all that does is I'm going to follow my stitching line right where I first started stitching and just stitch over it. Oh, for maybe ½ an inch. Okay, so once I've got that stitched for about ½ an inch or so, maybe a little bit more, I'm stitching right over the same seam, so you're not even going to see where it was stitched twice. All right, now I'm going to raise my needle all the way up to the highest point. Okay, I'm going to give my needle threads, let's raise my presser foot, little tug here. And we're actually going to lock the stitching. Now, I've given myself some extra thread. I'm going to slide under my presser foot and pull the needle threads towards me this way. Then I'm going to grab those loops and I'm going to cut them. Just like so. All right, I'm going to slide it, my real quick motion, I'm going to slide it off the back and towards the left. So I'm just going to pull like so. Clip the rest of the thread off there. Those are now locked in. There is my neckline, all finished. Okay, so I've already got my hems done on both my sleeves. I'm now going to show you how to lock on a serger stitch. So we can lift the front of, now remember, I'm not trimming off any of my fabric as I'm stitching because I cut a ¼ inch seam when I cut my project out. I do that when I know I'm going to be using the serger. The serger makes an exact ¼ inch seam. So this way I don't have any trims left to deal with, and I can go ahead and just start sewing. So I'm going to get a couple of stitches, or just one stitch actually, into, all right, one stitch in. Now I'm going to raise my presser foot. I'm going to pull my chain towards the back to clear it off the stitch fingers. And I'm just straightening it out. I'm not really tugging to the point where I'm going to break it. Then I'm going to pull it around in front of my needles. Okay, so it's in front of my machine. Lower my presser foot back down, leave that off to the side because I am going to trim it away, and continue my seam. Now that's going to lock the very beginning of my seam. And now when you get to the arm side where you've got another seam and another seam, you may want to flip the bottom one towards you and the top one away from you, so you get kind of a kind of a reverse action going here. And that way you're not going to have a knot there at the corner where the seam allowances meet. It's also easier for your serger to go over. Okay, to finish my seam, I'm going to go 1 stitch off the fabric. And if you want to turn your flywheel instead of running the machine, that's okay too, because you want to get it just off the edge. Okay, raise my presser foot again, slide my fabric straight back off the stitch fingers. You may have to give yourself a little tug on the needles. There we go. And flip the fabric toward you. Do you want to see that again? So it's laying flat like it just went through. Now I'm going to take the fabric and I'm going to take it and flip it directly toward me. So now I'm going to stitch on the other side of the fabric. So whereas I was stitching on the front first, now I'm going to be stitching on the back at the top. I'm going to line this right up in front of my needles, and I'm not going to trim anything off of this. Lower my presser foot back down and stitch up the side seam slightly and then off the edge, and then I can trim it, and there's my lock seam. Now I'm ready to do the second side. And we're going to go in the round again. So I've moved my little test fabric out of the way. Okay, here we go. Remember to remove your needle, remove your pins as you approach. You don't want to stitch through those. Okay, I'm coming up to my stitching again, and I'm going to overstitch about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, making sure my needles stitch in the exact same line as they did before. There we go. Okay, take one more stitch, bring it all the way to its highest point, raise the presser foot, give your threads a little tug on the needle. It might be easier if I do it this way. Reach under there with your tweezers and just pull your needle threads forward and then cut them. Okay, slide the T-shirt off the back and then quickly to the left. Cut the chain thread from the back side and you're done. As I was going around checking my fabrics and so forth, I found that I had skipped some stitches here. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to show you how to correct that. Now it's not going to come out because if you notice, it's just chained here. So it hasn't let go, the thread hasn't broken, but it did skip the stitching out here. So I want to make sure that I've got that stitched again. So just like I did at the end, I'm going to slide my fabric underneath. Now I'm going to line up my needles with the stitching I've already done, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch right along where those seams were, just like I was doing an overstitch to lock my seam, and just catch all of that I missed before. And now I've got my stitching complete. So if at some point I need to pull out a cover hem, okay, and I just don't like the way it's stitched and so forth, easy way to go. I'm going to go to where the end of my cover hem stitch was, which is this end, because my edge of my foot's going to be along this side. This is going to be the fabric. It's going to be onto the left side of the fabric, left side of the machine, and this will be the fabric to the right side. So this is the very end of my stitching, and I'm going to go ahead and pull my needle threads to the top. There's one, and here's two. This just gets them out of the way and gets them start the unstitching if you would. Then I'm going to go flip to the back side, and I'm going to find where's my end? There's my end right there, and all I'm going to do is just pull, and it's going to easily just unchain, and then I can remove the needle threads. And that's how you release a cover hem. At some point in time, you're going to want to pull out or remove serger stitching. It's easier than you think. Cut out that tail. And all you're going to need to do is take a pin, and working from the right side where you can see that center needle, I'm just going to remove that one thread. I'm going to pull it up with a little pin, grab hold of it, and pull the thread out of my fabric. Then I'm going to go back and take my left needle, get that thread up again. There it is. And pull this thread to remove it. Then your looper threads pull off just that easy. And you can go ahead and do your seam again. I so enjoyed making today's video. I'll let you in on the secret. After filming, I went back and made myself 3 more t-shirts. Now I've got t-shirts for that new Florida vacation. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time on Susan's So Creative, where it's only wrong when it doesn't work.